Hey everybody, today I'm talking about the evolution of board games. Now there's no doubt that the board game industry is in an absolute boom period at the moment. It's getting more and more popular by the year, but in the grand scope of things it's still very niche. And kind of, you know, the general public will generally assume that you like games like Monopoly or Scrabble and stuff like that. And you'll probably find yourself having that conversation where you're kind of saying that, no, I don't like games like that. I like games like this and this and this. And they would never have heard of those games. Now, one thing I usually do to explain the kind of evolution is to say, if I would have said I like video games, then you wouldn't say, what, like Pac-Man? You would assume you like more modern games. And I compare board games a lot to that because the difference between the older board games, like Monopoly and your Scrabbles, and the games of today are just as significant. So what I've done for this video is I've kind of picked up or made a list of all these kind of traditional games and compared them to games of the modern era because I think the games of the modern era are just generally better, they're more fun, they're faster, they look better, the production value's better. So just in case, you know, maybe a more kind of casual or someone with the more casual interests might be interested in maybe trying a newer game and they like one of those traditional games, they've got something to compare it to. So first off, let's start with a drawing game like Pictionary. Now, Pictionary is kind of what you call a party game. You get everyone around and have a good time together drawing things. And you know what, I think ultimately it's not a terrible game. But there are so many great drawing games out there now. That again are much more fun. And the first thing that I want to kind of mention is Telestrations. Now Telestrations is again another party game. It accommodates I think up to 8 players or so. And ultimately what you're doing is everybody has a dry erase book and you're going to maybe think of your own thing to draw, or you can use a bunch of cards and you're going to draw something. And then everybody's going to pass that book they've drawn to the person on their left. And then that person is going to write what that person drew. And then that process is going to repeat until your own book gets back to you. And then at the end, you're going to reveal the book and show the original drawing and then what they think the next person thought that was. And then you've got to draw that next thing. And as you go and go and go, you're going to kind of reveal the kind of process of what people's drawings and writings are. And it is an absolutely hilarious game. It's basically like a drawing or a doodling version of Chinese Whispers. Probably one of the most laugh out loud games out there and definitely one of the best party games out there. And I highly recommend that anybody try this because I think everybody can enjoy it. And as I said, just laugh out loud moments guaranteed. That is Telestrations. Now the second recommendation I have given is A Fake Artist Goes to New York. Now this game is by a very niche company called Oink Games. They're from Japan, I believe. They make these very tiny little box games. But this one is another drawing game, as I said. And everybody is going to have their kind of own colour of pen, and you're going to be drawing a picture together. But everybody is going to know what you're drawing apart from one player. And then you're going to take turns, maybe drawing like a line and pass the bit of paper along. And obviously when it gets to the person who doesn't know, who's the fake artist, he's going to basically wing that drawing and just hope to get away with it. And by the time everyone's finished drawing, you're going to guess who the fake artist was. And it's, again, very fun because sometimes when you catch out the fake artist, they're just doing things that are completely random and don't fit into the drawing at all. And sometimes they just get away with it and wing it completely. And you can completely blame someone else, even though they weren't the fake artist in the first place. So very fun games. And again, if you like drawing games, these are definitely ones to check out. The next game I've mentioned is Scrabble. Again, I think Scrabble is a generally decent game if you like making your words and stuff, but it's way too swingy for me. I think just the kind of multipliers and stuff you can get just generally aren't fair, just depending on circumstances and stuff like that. But there are some really great word games out there now, and in fact there are a ton of them. But two I've mentioned are Letter Jam. Letter Jam is a very recent game, but this one's different because it's a cooperative game. Everybody's working together. Basically, everybody's going to form a word in front of them made up of these individual letters. And then you're going to pass those words to the next player. And then one by one, they're going to reveal one of those letters on these standees that face away from them. And then everybody else is trying to give a clue to try help everybody else work out what those letters are. And basically you're trying to deduce what those letters are to ultimately formulate that word at the end. But it's a very clever game. It has that deduction element to it where you're trying to work out what these words are. You've got to be clever about how you use each other's words because obviously there are loads of variables and you don't want to give the wrong clues. And it's just a really well designed game and it's just really good fun. And I think it plays up to 8 players as well. So again, a big player range there. The second one I've mentioned is Paperback. Paperback is another game where you have these individual letters and you're trying to form words with them. But this one, you are working on by yourself, so you're not working in teams. But what you do is you start with a basic hand of cards with all the different letters on them, and you're trying to form words. Then the longer words you form, the more points you get, which means you can buy new letters into your hand, which ultimately means you can make bigger and bigger and bigger letters and score more and more points. It's what we call a deck building game, where basically, as I said, you start with a basic hand and you accumulate more powerful cards. It's a really good fun game. Again, it plays in a nice amount of time, and it just plays nice and smoothly, and it doesn't have a lot of rules overhead, but it still has that nice feeling of creating your own words and stuff like that. So that's Paperback. The next game I've mentioned is Blackjack. Now, Blackjack is kind of your classic casino game, a push your luck style game where you don't want to go bust by going over 21 by revealing cards one at a time. And again, there are loads of games like this, push your luck games they're called. And two I've mentioned. The first one is Coloretto. Coloretto is an ultra simple game where you are revealing these chameleon cards, and you're trying to collect these different sets of chameleon cards. Basically, you score for 3 sets of them, and the more you have of a certain type, the more kind of points you're going to get. But anyone above those 3 sets that you get is going to count as negative points. And the way you kind of accumulate these cards is you play them in these different columns, and you can either play a card or you can take a column. And the interesting thing is you can really kind of manipulate the board to suit yourself or to shaft other players, because there might be a column that really suits someone else because it has 2 of the different lizard types that they want, but then you play one that you know they definitely don't want, and you can give them a bunch of negative points. Very good, very fast, very clean design, and it's very cheap as well, so definitely want to check out. That is Coloretto. The next one, which really does have the stronger feeling of going bust, is Push. Now, Push, again, is a game that works a bit like Coloretto in respect of playing the cards in different columns. This one, you can't play a duplicate number or a duplicate colour in a column. But you can choose to stop and whenever you like when playing these cards one at a time. And then you take one of these columns and play it in front of you, and then everybody else will kind of take a column of cards in player order. But sometimes you can take these cards that have a dice on them. And then if you take that card that have a dice on them, you've got to roll that dice. And depending on which face it lands on, you're going to have to lose all the colours that you've collected, or the cards of that certain colour that you've collected, out of the game. You've lost all those points. But alternatively, you can just choose to bank a column of cards as well. So again, you've got that really raw tension of, am I going to bank this card, or am I going to gamble and potentially go bust and have to roll and potentially lose all my cards? It's so much fun. The tension is really there, and just that blackjack pushy luck feel is ultra palpable. That is Push. The next game, I've got another casino style game, Poker. Poker is probably the most popular game in the world, or one of them. And there are loads of different variations on this, and again, lots of kind of games where you kind of collect sets of different cards and stuff like this. But one that I think is the most relatable to it is Battleline. Now, Battleline is a strictly 2-player game, a 2-player card game, where you have a row of these 9 different pawns, known as flags, and then you're going to be playing cards one at a time, your opponent back and forth, that is. And you've got basically 6 different suits of colours, numbered from 1 to 10, and you're trying to get all the standard poker hands, such as your straights and your 3 of a kind and stuff like that. But this one, you don't play. You only play 3 card poker hands. And basically, when you play them on these different flags, whoever's got the strongest formation on each side of these flags is going to claim that flag. And you're trying to claim 5 flags ultimately, or 3 flags adjacently. And it's just really good. Again, another really game full of tension, wonderfully balanced game, so clean design, and it just takes poker to the next level. It's brilliant, a fantastic game. That is Battleline. The next game I've mentioned might be a bit kind of thinking outside the box, but it really does have that tension of bluffing, and which is kind of one of the fun parts of poker. This is Cash and Guns. Cash and Guns is a party game, so it can play a lot of different players, which I thought is quite a nice contrast to Battleline. But this one, you basically have a bunch of foam guns and a bunch of kind of goods in the middle of the table. And everybody's got a deck of cards with a certain number of bullets in them and a certain number of kind of blanks. And ultimately, you're going to have a chat and decide at the end of the round, you're going to point your gun at somebody else on the table. So think of like Reservoir Dogs. and then ultimately everybody's either put a bullet in their gun or they've either put a blank in their gun. And then you can ultimately choose to kind of fold and sit out of the round because you think you're going to get too many people shooting at you, which will lose you lives and kick you out of the game. Or you can just choose to stay in and basically call their bluff and hope that not enough people shoot you, and then you get the kind of dibs on the treasure in the middle of the table. That's what this game is. It's all about bluffing. It's fantastic. It's so much fun, and it just has that real kind of poker tension feel to it of, are you going to call their bluff or are you not? That is Cash and Guns. Next, I've mentioned Risk. Now, Risk is probably one of the forefathers of board gaming. So popular, I think everybody kind of played this game as a kid. There are a million different games based on Risk nowadays. You can think of anything or any kind of theme you like, such as Vikings or Egyptians or ancient kind of Japanese culture, or there's so many different versions of these games. They're called area control games or area majority games. They're also known as dudes on a map games. Risk is obviously that game where you kind of, it's a game of world domination where you start with a certain amount of pawns and you're rolling dice to try and conquer new territories. But I think the game has a lot of problems itself. It has a real runaway leader problem where the better you do, the better you do. And the worse you do, you kind of get more steamrolled and you can get out of the game. And it also takes way too long for me. There are loads of new implementations of this. And again, you can pretty much think of anything you want to replace it. But some I've mentioned are Blood Rage. Blood Rage is a really cool game about Vikings, and you've got these Viking clans and your different monsters you're getting, trying to control these regions, trying to increase your power, and every round Ragnarok happens and certain regions just get blown up and you can score loads of points in loads of different ways. The next one is by the same designer actually, called Eric Lang, called Rising Sun, which is set in kind of feudal, medieval, fantastical Japan, and again it's a game where you're controlling all these different warriors, trying to control these regions, trying to get the majority in these regions to get points and to collect these different tokens for area majorities. And it's just a fantastic, dynamic, very visual, beautiful game. But the one that really strikes me is a game called El Grande, and that is because its game mechanisms are so much more pure. There's a lot less of a luck factor in it, but it still does have nice tactical decisions and nice strategic decisions. It's very pure in its design, and it just kind of negates all that swingy luck. It doesn't take too long. It's just a fantastic design game. It's actually probably my favorite game of all time. This one doesn't kind of have the thematic appeal as some of these other games I mentioned, but just the game mechanisms itself are so much better, so much cleaner, and just so much more fun. So definitely check out El Grande if you like your area control games like Risk. Next, I've mentioned Monopoly. Now, Monopoly is the game that everybody mentions. It's the hood ornament of board gaming, for better or for worse. I personally don't like the game at all, but no hard feelings to anybody who does. Again, because it takes too long, it has a runaway leader problem, and it's just way too lucky. But there are some things I do like about it, and number one is the auction element of it. And there are loads of good auction games out there, but this one I mentioned, called For Sale, is one that's more kind of tangible because it's about buying and selling properties, much like Monopoly. This is a very slick, quick card game. I think it's 3 to 6 players. It takes about 20 minutes to play. Basically, you're going to reveal a bunch of properties and you're going to take turns auctioning for these properties. And you're either going to, keep bidding, or you can fold and then take the cheapest property that's available. If you fold, that is. And then at the end of the game, at the end of the first round, when all those properties are bought, you're going to blind basically bid with those properties you've bought to claim a certain amount of cash. And the higher the property you play is the higher cash card that you take. But the kind of variables that these cash cards come out can really throw spanners in the works. There's great decisions about when you're going to play the certain types of cards, or your most powerful cards or your weaker cards. And this is just an excellent, superbly fun family weight game that anybody can enjoy. That is For Sale. The next one I've mentioned is Racoon Tycoon. Now again, this is a game about auctions and about kind of stocks and shares, as you're basically accumulating these different resources, trying to raise the kind of price of these different goods and then sell them when they're most valuable. And you're using that money to either buy new cards, or which give you points at auctions, or you can buy new kind of abilities with these buildings that let you do things that other players can't do. It really does have that kind of tycoon style feel that you'd expect from a game like Monopoly, but this one just drags it into this day and age. It's a nice, fun game, very kind of boiled down to very simple decisions, but very meaningful decisions, and it just looks absolutely stunning as well. That is Racoon Tycoon, a fantastic game. The next game I mentioned is Cluedo, or Clue if you're from overseas. Now, deduction games like Cluedo are very popular, and there are loads of good versions of it. Cluedo, I think, is an okay game, but the rolling of the dice to move around is just boring, it's slow, and it's way too luck dependent. But two games I've mentioned is one called Cryptid. Cryptid is a very cool game where you are trying to work out where a monster is on a grid, but the way you work out where that monster is by working out which individual rule each player has, because at the beginning of the game everybody's going to be given a unique rule that only they have, which is going to help pinpoint where the monster is if you combine everybody's unique rule. It has a very kind of clever algorithm that works out this kind of maths behind it, and all you're going to do on your turn is you're going to ask another player if that monster can be on a certain spot or not. And if they say it can be, then they put a kind of a token down that says yes, and you also have to do the same. But likewise, if they say no, you've got to do the same as well. So really cool, very simple design. The race to find out where the kind of cryptid monster is great. And yeah, a lot of fun, that one. The next one I've mentioned is Awkward Guests, which is a game I kind of go on about all the time because it's so good. This one is a kind of your classic murder mystery deduction game like Cluedo is, where you're trying to work out who the murderer is, what weapon they've used, what their motive is, and so on. But this one is so much more fun. There's no rolling of the dice. It's just all about kind of card play, as you are drawing these cards into your hand, trying to tick off different things about all these different information you've got, such as you know, the rooms they've gone into, or you know, the motives and stuff like that, or the weapons they've used. And you're trying to work out who the murderer is by using those cards, trading those cards with another, trying to keep the most important information to yourself. And yeah, just a fantastic, well-designed game with a million different outcomes that you can give. Brilliant! What a great game. Next one I've got is an absolute kind of kids game, Snakes and Ladders, where you're rolling the dice, trying to race to the top of the board, trying to land on the spots you want and not to land on the spots you don't want. Roll and move games generally have a bad kind of reputation in board games nowadays because, again, it's so lucky and so luck dependent. But there are a few good ones out there. Ones that I mentioned are Marrakesh. Marrakesh is a very simple game where you have this kind of, I think it's a 10 by 10 grid. You're rolling a dice, moving in this little guy around, this little rug salesman that everybody controls, and then laying a piece of rug down. And then you can either stay as he is or rotate that worker 90 degrees, or 45 degrees, and you're going to roll the dice again. But obviously, as you more and more kind of go on the game, you're going to lay more and more carpet down, and then whenever you land on somebody else's carpet, you've got to give them money depending on the surface area of that carpet. So it has this real kind of fun tension to it as you're trying to cover as much region as you can, trying to avoid landing on other people's carpet. Very simple, but very fun. The next one I've got is Jamaica, which is a game where you're rolling 2 dice, and then you're going to allocate these dice on these 2 spots, and then play a card relating to those dice. It's a kind of a racing game where you're trying to race around Jamaica, trying to fight each other. It's got a pirate theme where you're shooting cannons at each other, collecting treasure. Very simple, a nice kids fun game, but still very good for adults as well. If you like your more strategic games, you've got a game like Merlin, which has a lot of kind of depth into it. And you are rolling dice, moving this guy around the wheel, which allocates the different actions you can take. I won't go too much into that one because there's quite a bit that's going on. But if you like that racing feel of Snakes and Ladders, there are also loads of great racing games. 2 that I've mentioned are Flamme Rouge, which is a kind of Tour de France style racing game, and Camel Up as well, which is where you're betting on these different camels who are going to win the race or not. But the cool thing is they kind of piggyback on each other and can really mix up the variables. Great fun games. Definitely check those ones out. The next one I mentioned is Yatzee. Yatzee is, I think, again, another okay game, but There are lots of kind of dice games now where it has that Yatzee mechanism where you kind of roll and you can roll again to try and get the kind of outcomes that you want. So I've mentioned 3 here. The first one I've got is Age of War. This is a game where you have a bunch of dice, you're trying to roll them to match these different kind of castles on the board to claim them. And once you claim them, you get a certain amount of points. And if you collect sets of them, you get more points. But the cool thing is you can roll them and try to claim them off other players as well. Very simple, but very fun. The next one I've got is King of Tokyo, which is an immensely popular game where you are basically taking control of these huge kaiju monsters based on like Godzilla, and you are smashing the hell out of each other, trying to get new power abilities and stuff like that. And it's basically a King of the Hill style game where you are trying to stay in the city as much as you can and accumulate points. And the next one I've got is Bang the Dice game, where it's set in this kind of Western world, and all these cards are divvied up. One person's the sheriff, some people are secretly the deputies or the outlaws or the renegade, and then you're basically rolling dice and shooting at each other. You can heal yourself up and stuff like that. And you're basically trying to work out who your deputies are or who the outlaws are. You can bluff with each other, and it's basically the last man standing, or whatever team's the last standing is going to win. Great fun. Dexterity games are also very popular when in terms of traditional games such as your Jenga and your Operation and stuff like that. And again, dexterity games are still very popular now. Some that I've mentioned here are Rhino Hero or Rhino Hero Super Battle. These are ones that are very kid friendly, as you're basically stacking a tower made of cards. Super Battle is a huge grandiose towers where you can make towers that are about 5 foot tall, I believe. You've got Junk Art, where you have these different wooden pieces and you're trying to form these sculptures. And Meeple Circus as well, which is quite a cool one, where you have these different wooden pieces and you're trying to do this balancing act and trying to keep it standing for a certain amount of time. And there's also Flick 'em Up as well, which is a flicking game set in the Wild West. You have all these different scenarios, a beautiful production with all these different abilities, and you're basically flicking this puck at each other, trying to shoot each other's cowboys and win these different scenarios and objectives. So dexterity games, not normally my cup of tea, but I can see the appeal and the fun factor of them, and these are some to check out. Next thing I mentioned is rock, paper, scissors games. So these are kind of what we call like simultaneous selection games. I've done a top 10 list of this if you want to check that one out. But there are loads of cool games that use this kind of mechanism where you're both simultaneously doing things at the same time and trying to work out, whose kind of benefits the most. And 3 games I've mentioned in kind of different, varying kind of complexity levels are Dashu, which is a very simple game where you have a kind of a take, a give, or an agree kind of card that you have. And what you're going to do is you're going to reveal 3 cards at a time, and you're going to play one of these cards in order to collect these cards to the side of your table, and you're basically trying to control the majority of these cards, but only by a certain amount, because the smaller the margin you win by, the more points you're going to get. So you've got to play carefully about when you're going to give the cards, when you're going to take the cards for yourself, and it has that kind of mind-on-mind kind of mind-reading feel to it. The next thing I mentioned is a party game called Tifa Tashin, where everybody, I think it plays up to like 8 players, and everybody takes the role of these corrupt politicians, and you're trying to make as much money as possible by playing these cards. You can either kind of keep the president in power, you can kick them out, you can bribe people, you can blackmail people, all to make as much money as you can by the time the game finishes. Great fun and a great use of that kind of paper, rock, scissors style card play. The next one I've got is Libertalia, where you have all these different cards that interact with each other in different ways. It's got this pirate feel. You're trying to get the best loot, trying to shaft other players by giving them the worst loot, and it's all about how you're going to use those cards and when you're going to use them, and thinking about what other players are going to play at the certain times. The next game I've mentioned is chess. Again, one of the most popular games in the world. This is what we call abstract games, games that have pretty much no luck in them at all, games of perfect information. Now, there are loads of these games out, and these are some that I'm going to mention now, is Onitama. Onitama is a very clean design, has a very chess-like feel, where you have this grid of, I think it's a 4x5 grid, I could be wrong on that, and And you basically have these different pawns, which are kind of martial arts experts, and you're going to move those pawns around the board, trying to either collect or kind of defeat all the other teams' kind of martial arts masters, or trying to get your master on their master's throne. And the way you move them around is by playing these different cards, or choosing the action on these different cards, which will dictate how you can move. But when you use one of those cards, that card goes to your opponent's side, and then they can do that action back to you. Very clever, very clean, and a great abstract game. The next one I've got is Santorini. A beautiful produced game where you are basically placing these different buildings, trying to climb to the top of a tower, and it's a very kind of back and forth abstract style game where you want to not only benefit yourself but stop your other opponent from winning at all times. We've got Raptor as well, where you've got this team of scientists and a team of dinosaurs, and if you're the scientist, you've got to try and basically steal an amount of raptor babies, and if you're the Raptor, you've got to try and defend your babies by killing all the scientists. But again, surprisingly how thematic the game is, it's very abstract in its feel, and has that nice kind of grid movement feel, and you've got to think about how you're going to move things around to benefit yourself. And the next one I've got is Photosynthesis. A very clever game about planting trees and trying to block your opponent's trees from gaining light. Based on the sun moves around the board, and you've got to use the shadows to your benefit to get as much light points in order to grow your trees and to ultimately cut them down to get victory points. Fantastic game. Just a few more to go now. So I've got Battleships. Battleships, again, a kind of a classic game. There are not maybe as many games that relate to battleships, but one that I've mentioned is Captain Sonar, which is a team versus team game. I would describe this as Battleships ramped up to 100, because you are going to both control a submarine each as a team. Each team kind of involves 4 players, but you can play with less, and everybody has a unique role. And it's a real-time game, so there's no turn structure. Everybody's playing at the same time in real time, and you're basically calling out moves as you're going to go around the board. You're trying to work out the moves that your opponents are making by mapping it out on a map, trying to deduce where they are on the map in order to place landmines or torpedoes and shoot them and defeat the other submarine. Great fun, but maybe a bit more teaching that goes into it than the average game. Alternatively, if you don't want a team-based game, you've got Sonar, which is the kind of the smaller version of the game. Next one we've got is trivia games. Now, trivia games are huge in terms of like mainstreamness, but the problem with them is that most players, or there's always kind of one person in your group who knows everything, who will always win because they're more knowledgeable in terms of general knowledge. But one game that really nullifies that is Wits and Wages. Wits and Wages is a fantastic party game where you are given a question with a number-based answer, and all these questions are so difficult that you kind of have to give a guesstimation, and you're going to write that down. And everyone's going to write it down at the same time. They're going to reveal them all at the same time and place them on this board that dictate the odds of your answer being correctly. So the more kind of middle answers are going to give you lower odds than the more extremes. And then what you can do is, if you think, oh, well, I'm way off here because everybody else has gone a certain direction, you can bet on somebody else being correct, which is such a great idea because, again, you can really do well on this game by not knowing a thing and by guessing who you think will know. Great game, so much fun, and I think it's a must-have in every collection. That is Wits and Wages. Next, I've mentioned Uno. Uno, I think, is a pretty bad game, a game that plays itself. There's no real choices to make because it depends on what cards you have. But there are so many great small card games that take 5-10 minutes like Uno does. Some that I've mentioned are Red 7. Red 7 is a game where you're trying to stay in the game as long as you can by manipulating the rule and playing cards and always kind of being in the dominant position. You've got 6 Nimped, which is a very tense game where you are playing these cards trying to get as least points as possible because every point you take is basically negative. And you're playing these cards in order, and as soon as a 6th card is played, then somebody's going to take the whole row as negative points. Check out my review of it. And No Thanks as well. Another very simple, clean game where you are bidding not to take cards. And every time you bid, this card kind of accumulates points, all these chips on. And then ultimately you're going to bite the bullet and take that card as negative points. But every chip you have on it counts as a kind of a positive, which is fantastic. And finally, I've mentioned Sudoku as well. Sudoku, there's puzzly little games that, you know, that were very popular maybe 10, 20 years ago. There are games like that now, well, loads of puzzle style games, but the one I've mentioned more kind of closely to Sudoku is Sagrada. Sagrada is a stunningly beautiful game that uses dice. You're going to roll a bunch of these translucent dice, and you're trying to formulate this kind of stained glass window, and you are placing these dice in these different locations, trying to not have any colours adjacent to each other or any numbers adjacent to each other, but you're also trying to make certain patterns to score points. Maybe that's having, you know, maybe one of each colour of dice on a row or a column, or having certain amounts of numbers next to each other and stuff like that. Fantastic game, a very nice gateway game, and again, it looks absolutely stunning. So I think the video went on a bit longer than I anticipated, but I hope there's something here that maybe kind of piqued your interest. And if you do like the idea of board gaming, there really is something for everybody out there. I do truly believe that, because there is so much variation and so many things to try. So definitely, you know, dip your toe into the hobby and just, you know, try something, because tell you what, games aren't as boring as they used to be. It's not all about dice rolling. They don't take 3 hours long, and you can have a really great experience in a short amount of time and just have tremendous fun, because this really is a fantastic thing